So for our young people's history, me and Michael had chapter 24, chapter 25, which is the war in Iraq and the conflict at home. And our central question was, what were the social, political, and economic factors that contributed to the national government's willingness to go to war? So Zinn starts the chapter by talking about how in the early 2000s there were problems both abroad and at home for the American people. The terrorist attacks on New York City and Washington, D.C. would soon lead to a war on terror that would last for years to come. And we would go into Afghanistan and Iraq searching for Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. At home, a catastrophic hurricane had absolutely destroyed the southeast, specifically the city of New Orleans, and had left thousands of people displaced from their homes. And the lack of response by the national government had left many people questioning the morality of our leaders, of those who are governing. And in addition to this, questions about what it truly meant to be an American were starting to be asked, as well as immigration, specifically from Mexico, was on the rise. So prior to 9/11, American forces invaded Afghanistan in search of Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, which was the group that would eventually claim responsibility of the attacks on 9/11. And in addition to this, another one of their goals was to take the Taliban out of power, which they were not successful in doing so. And this invasion led to the deaths of thousands of people, both American and Afghanistani. And the American government reasoned this invasion of the country, for the reason of getting rid of the Taliban and finding Osama bin Laden, but they were unsuccessful in both. So citizens of Afghanistan were obviously very upset, and they, held a lot of resentment towards America. And then post 9/11, the national government was looking for someone to blame and settle on Iraq, even though there was no clear link from the country to the attacks. The way that George Bush and his administration would do this is by saying Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and they proved to be an imminent nuclear threat. The United Nations did several investigations into the country and found no clear evidence of weapons of mass destruction, but we went into Iraq anyway in search of something that was said to be not there. And much like the Vietnam War, American citizens quickly grew sour towards the idea of more war in the Middle East, especially after Afghanistan. People saw the loss of lives, the promises that were made about why we're going there, and nothing really came to fruition. And what people thought would happen is inevitably what did happen, and that we went to Iraq and nothing much changed. So the start of Operation Iraqi Freedom started with 5,500 troops being deployed into Iraq, and within 6 weeks, the American military was able to secure the capital of Iraq, Baghdad. And at this point, George Bush's administration considered the mission a success, and Iraq was free. But that was very untrue. Much like Afghanistan, Iraq was torn apart, and its people were resentful of the occupation of their country. And much like Afghanistan as well, casualties were rising. 2,500 American soldiers dying. And the administration tried very hard to keep that from being seen by the American public. And news of what had been going on in the country had led to a lot of American citizens feeling even more against the thought of war, torturing Iraqi citizens, just pictures of what had been happening, the atrocities that were occurring. In addition to this, the Patriot Act post 9/11 had basically allowed the United States government to bend the rules of the judicial system in the name of counterterrorism. So with this reasoning for war, all these things that are being promised that are not coming to fruition, being stretched, the anti-war movement began to gain momentum. Parents of soldiers were now demanding answers, and one in particular, Cindy Sheehan, whose son Casey had died in Iraq, was at a George Bush rally and had questioned him on the purpose of her son going to Iraq, saying, did my son die for oil? Because under Iraq is the second largest. So Iraq has the second largest oil reserve in the world. So a lot of people were speculating that much of the reason we chose Iraq as a country to blame post 9/11 was because of that oil and the economic opportunity that was behind that oil. So despite all this going on overseas, we have issues at home as well. Hurricane Katrina had just battered the southeast, specifically New Orleans, and this left thousands of people displaced, hundreds killed. Massive floods, power outages, people don't have access to food, water, plumbing. So, it's not something that you would expect to see from America, especially while we're spending billions of dollars on a war effort in a country that we honestly have no right in being in at this time. So this led to a lot of people questioning the morality of the American government, specifically because most of the people that were being affected by Hurricane Katrina were minority groups. And so, we're spending so much money on a war that, again, we shouldn't be fighting, and we have American citizens dying, losing their homes, and such. So it's really just a bad look for the government, and specifically the Bush administration. And in addition to this, so along with Hurricane Katrina, we also have immigration from Mexico. So during the war effort, it was important for the Bush administration to have a sense of one with America. We're fighting a war, we want to be it's us versus them. And unfortunately, there would be unforeseen consequences with this, specifically having to do with immigration, because people started questioning what it meant to truly be an American citizen. And specifically with illegal immigrants coming from Mexico. So there was legislation for a 750-mile wall was approved to be built from California to Arizona. It's ironic because this is land that was once claimed by Mexico that we had just taken from them, and now we're saying you cannot come here anymore. And in 2005, punishments for those who came illegally were being discussed as well. And this led to, of course, led to a lot of protests, with the main message of the protest being that no human being was illegal. And I'm going to give it over to Michael to go over our activities.
After instruction, students will get together and form Venn diagrams, comparing and contrasting the Vietnam War to the War on Terror, because there are a lot of similarities, especially in the general public and on the at-home side of things. Some of the key similarities are the social and racial reform that we could see in the civil rights movement in the Vietnam War, and the border and immigration policy change in the War on Terror era. Political scandals, very famous U.S. Patriot Act, and Watergate, of course. Huge peace rallies and efforts, especially near the later half of the wars. Overall, just a very general disliking towards the war effort, especially near the end of the war. These two kind of go hand in hand. Key differences though, Vietnam War was fought in Vietnam. War on Terror was fought mainly in Iraq and Afghanistan. The starts to them can be considered illegitimate to certain people. The start of the war was, even with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, it was a proxy war with the USSR to free Vietnam from communism, kind of in the same way that the WMDs that Iraq was suspected to having was just a scapegoat to kind of pin Al-Qaeda to an area. And the goal was to eliminate Al-Qaeda, find WMDs. And after that, so students will get together, form Venn diagram, and then as a whole class put together on the board something like this and share and comment on each other's work.